Do you want to learn how to make trippy visuals with just your iPhone like this? Then stay tuned because I'm going to show you how to get started with all the new features in Chromatose 1.3. Let's go. Hi, I'm Ed, the creator of Chromatose. If you're new here, Chromatose is a real-time visual instrument for iPhone and iPad. You can check it out free on the App Store, which is linked below. In this video, I'm just covering what's new in version 1.3. So if you want the full overview, check out the full walkthrough video in the description. First up is one of the most requested new features, the new camera generator. It captures live video from the front or back camera with zoom control, automatic orientation handling, built-in crop controls, and all the same parameters as the photo generator. I've been having a lot of fun with this one lately, and I think you will too. To access the camera generator, just bring up the generator list here and select camera. Now this is the back camera of my iPad, which is pointing at my desk, but I can also select to switch to the front camera here. And now we have the front-facing camera and the typical controls you'd expect on a generator, like level, scale, rotate, moving along the X and the Y axis. And these are all common to most of the generators except the zoom. The zoom actually uses the camera zoom, so it will intelligently switch between the different camera lenses on your device if you have more than one. So just like on the photo generator, we can add spacing. And then if not zoom, because zoom is the actual optical lens, but the scale, if I bring the scale out, then we have multiple versions. So we can adjust the spacing, and we can also change the sample mode, just like with the photo generator. So now it's unclamped. If I do repeated, we get a repeated version. And if I do mirrored, we have a mirrored version, which may look better with spacing down. And then what's also helpful here is there are some cropping parameters for the top, bottom, left, and right. So I can crop the top of the image down. Maybe this is easier to see if I go back to clamped and maybe add a little spacing. So now it crops the top of the image down. So if you really want to dial in something and cut out some of the background, you can do the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. And of course, there's lots of included presets that use the camera, this edge wave being one of my favorite. So you can experiment and play around and have a lot of fun with this one. We can also use the camera generator to create physical feedback loops when the output is displayed on another screen. Here I have my iPad connected to my Mac with the USB-C cable. Here's an easy trick to capture the iPad screen. I just use QuickTime Player and then select File, New Movie Recording, then select the iPad as the video source. And we can use the standard effects in Chromatose to get some pretty cool results. So next up is the wave effect, and this is probably the most powerful effect in the app so far. If you've ever used audio FM synthesis before, the idea is kind of similar. There's a bass carrier wave, A, that's modulated by two higher frequency modulator waves, B and C. All three waves have controls for frequency, amplitude, and phase, and the rest of the parameters shape the effect as a whole. Let's dive in with a quick example. To get started, we just tap on the Add Effect button, and then we scroll down and select wave. Now you might notice that if you just adjust one of these, like the frequency, for example, it doesn't do anything. That's because in order for a wave to be generated, you have to have both a frequency and an amplitude. So if I turn the amplitude up, it's not working. If I bring the frequency all the way down, it goes back. So the frequency is how dense the wave pattern is from left to right, and the amplitude is how high the wave is from top to bottom. And there's also a phase parameter that goes left and right that will move the wave across the left and right axis. And of course, all of these parameters are modulatable, so we could modulate the phase to give it some motion, maybe reduce the frequency a little bit. And those are the three parameters for the A wave. But we also have a B wave, which has the same three parameters, but the frequency is offset slightly, so it has a higher frequency. Let me give this some amplitude. And what you're going to notice here is that the B wave gets added to the A wave, which is really powerful because this creates a lot of really interesting results. And the B wave has its own phase, which we can move left and right, which moves independently of A's phase. So we could actually have the B phase going in the opposite direction if we change this to continuous down and maybe make it go a bit faster. And then we have the same exact thing for C, but again, C is a higher frequency than both A and B. So if we turn this one all the way up, it's going to give us the highest frequency range possible. And it also has its own phase. And that alone is pretty cool, but there are some other parameters we can still use to play with this a little bit. So the attenuation will kind of taper off the effect towards the left and the right side, just leaving it visible in the center. Rotation will rotate not the incoming image, but just the wave effect that gets applied. And the position parameter will move the entire wave effect left and right. And the other thing we can manipulate is the shape. So the shape by default is at 0.5, which is a sine wave. And if we bring it all the way down to the left, it turns into a triangle wave. And if we bring it all the way up to the right, it starts to morph into a square wave. And if you go all the way up, it's such a hard square that it doesn't even really look like a wave anymore, but this also creates interesting effects. And the X mod parameter does a cross modulation, which means it's having the vertical offset of the wave pattern generate a horizontal wave, which can create some really cool results. And finally, there's a chromatic aberration, which will separate the color channels based on where the wave has the highest intensity. And I find this looks really cool if we have a smoother kind of a input coming in. And of course, we can modulate the position, for example. And we can even add another wave effect on top of this wave effect to get a double wave. And that's cool with lines, but it's also a lot of fun if we load in a photo with the photo generator. You can start to get some really glitchy effects that are reminiscent of old CRT televisions. Now I want to talk about cropping. So in the camera generator, there are some built-in cropping controls. These are also built in now to the photo generator. We can do simple cropping on the top left bottom and right. But that only helps for a single image. But let's say we had this going into another effect, like a keying effect, and then we had some feedback. And then what if we wanted to crop this whole thing? Well, now there's a new crop effect, which includes 3 configurable shapes. So the way this works is you select one of the 3 shapes. So the first is the rectangle, and this works exactly the same as with the photo and the camera generator, where you can offset the top and the bottom, the left and the right. Or you can select a quad, which gives you a lot of control. So this is the X position of the top left point and the Y. And we have corresponding controls for all 4 corners of the quad. So we can get interesting 4-sided shapes going on here, even triangles if you bring it up all the way. And the last type is an oval, which gives us a oval or circular shape, which we can move around. And this can be useful for various creative uses, but also for projector placement or even basic projection mapping. The keying effect also got a big upgrade. So in addition to being able to key by luma or brightness, you can now key out by saturation or hue. So now there's a selector here, which you can select, which the default is luma, which is the same behavior as before. And this one, of course, just does the brightness, the upper edge and the bottom edge. But now we can select saturation, which instead of by brightness, it will mask out the values based on the saturation. So the rabbit's eyes are the most saturated, so they get pulled out first, if we're going from top down. If we go from the bottom up, it will mask out all of the least saturated values. And of course, the softness control is still here, so we can have softer edges as we do this. And the other option is the hue. So there's a new kind of hue selector here, which indicates the selected hue now, which is red. And if I bring up this threshold a little bit, you see it's going to start to key out everything that's red or in the range of red. As I bring this up, it widens the threshold until almost everything gets keyed out. So now it's keying out the red parts, but I can cycle this hue and you see it's going to key out different parts of the eyes. Let me bring the threshold up a little bit more. So this is how you can key out a specific color, but if you turn the threshold all the way up, it's going to leave in a specific color, which would not be blue as we have here, but the opposite color on the color wheel. So another way we can visualize this is by using a different photo. We can have a color wheel here. So we have red keyed out now. And as we increase the threshold, it widens that amount that's keyed out. And you see the opposite on the color wheel of red is cyan. So if we bring this all the way up, we're going to have this cyan. And now as we rotate the hue, we're going to have what's keyed out being rotated. So this is how you can leave only one color or key out a specific color.
A lot of you asked for more flexible payment options, so there's now a new monthly plan. It's the same Pro plan, just with a different billing option. The annual plan is still the best value with up to 30% savings. Prices may vary by region. The macro system got a major overhaul. So I have a patch here with various macro knobs already mapped. Just as before, we can manipulate the map parameters from the detail view, But if I were to tap on one of the labels now, you can see there's a new macro detail view. And from here, I can see all of the mapped parameters, as well as their location. I can tap on the location, and that will bring me back to design view, and it will show me exactly where that parameter is mapped, and it will blink the little label here. If I go back to the performance view, I can tap on one of the macros that have multiple parameters mapped, and we see them all listed here. This is where the custom label comes in handy. So instead of having it say multi as the default, you can change the custom name here. If I delete that, it will just revert back to the default, which is determined by the parameter that it's mapped to. I can delete individual macro mappings here by swiping, and I can also tap and hold the clear all button to delete them all. And if I wanted to map this to a different MIDI CC, I can either tap the map button like this and wait for the control value to come in, or I can manually type in the values.
Chromatose now registers a virtual MIDI input. That means other apps on the same device can route MIDI directly into Chromatose with no external hardware needed. For example, I have a patch here running with a parameter mapped to a macro knob, which I can turn with my finger here. Now, if I make sure that MIDI is enabled, I can then go to another app like AUM, for example, and I can add a MIDI track. And here I'm going to add just a simple LFO device. And I'm going to configure that to have one LFO, tempo synced, and you see the MIDI CC number here is 13. And the transport of AUM is off, so nothing is happening. Let me start this. And I'm going to change this shape to a saw and maybe increase the rate a little bit. Now this pattern that we see here animating should be getting sent to Chromatose, but only if we go into the routing and then route that channel to Chromatose's virtual input, which now shows up here. So now if we go back to Chromatose and put AUM in the background, you'll see the scale parameter is being modulated by the LFO. That's because this is already mapped to 13. If it wasn't mapped, we can just tap map and it will pick up that mapping as long as that's the only CC MIDI value being sent. The other thing we can do is have the BPM be synced. So Chromatose has its own individual BPM for driving the internal LFOs for all of the modulations. If we go into settings and MIDI and make sure MIDI sync is turned on, that alone will not affect the change. We need a MIDI clock, so we can go into AUM again, tap here, and we can select MIDI clock send, and we can enable that. MIDI clock send is now on. Connect MIDI destinations, Chromatose. So now you see the tempo in AUM is 120. We go back to Chromatose. Now the BPM is following the clock from AUM at 120. So this means you can perform music and have various devices in your DAW software and synchronize Chromatose over MIDI with those devices. We can now render a device local preview while an external display is connected. Just connect a display and choose a local preview resolution in the graphics engine settings. Higher resolutions use more resources, so pick what works best for your device or disable it for maximum performance. There are also some really helpful library improvements. Chromatose now remembers your last search text, sort order, and tag filters when you reopen the library. The patch library is now lazy loaded, which makes large libraries much faster and more responsive. And patch loading is faster overall too. The audio engine has been optimized for better performance, It can now run in the background, which means audio from other apps can play at the same time.
Audio modulation parameters like depth, attack, and decay can now be mapped to macros and modulated.
There are also a bunch of general UI improvements. Parameters with lots of options now use a menu for faster selection. And there are 2 new modulation rate multipliers, 32 and 1/32, for extreme speeds. I also fixed a pretty major bug in the mixer. Not all blend and composite combinations were being applied correctly before. They now produce correct results with proper alpha handling and smoother edges. Some older patches may look different after this fix, so you may need to readjust those settings. I do my best to avoid publishing breaking changes, but in cases like this, having correct behavior is most important. There's also a new reference chart in the user manual, visually showing how all the combinations work, which is linked below. And there's also a new color dodge blend mode, which is especially fun with feedback. So that's it for version 1.3. There are a lot of powerful new features here, but some of them do use more resources. So if you start seeing frame drops, use them a little more sparingly or check the troubleshooting section in the user manual for tips. Did I miss the feature that you want the most? Let me know in the comments because the most requested features get prioritized first. See you next time and happy exploring.